Well, this is it, the final part of the Original Six celebration. After this, I'm done. I no longer have to make these videos, as I will have had covered every one of the NHL's original teams. It's pretty crazy to think that this series is coming to an end. All these videos will probably come out at the same time, but this process has taken nearly 3 months. For it to end is a little bittersweet. If you have watched any of the videos, even if just one, I want to say thank you. I really appreciate it. Maybe you learned something new, maybe you got into hockey, or maybe you just found them entertaining. Whatever it is, I am very grateful for the view.
But it's not done yet. We have one more team to cover. We started this series in Montreal, in Canada. Then we traveled to Toronto before crossing the northern border and heading to Boston. We then went to New York, and then to Chicago. Finally, we will find ourselves in the Motor City. Staying in the Midwest, we will cover the Detroit Red Wings in the final episode of this series.
I have been a Red Wings fan my entire life, so I am way more versed in their history than any other team I have discussed. With that said, I still learned some interesting things about them. Overall, as a Detroit Red Wings fan, it means more for me to share their history than any other team. I also get to relive a time where they were a powerhouse of a team, since they have been mediocre to bad my entire life. Hopefully they will eventually return to their former glory, but I digress, as it is time to finish this series. If you watched the previous videos on the New York Rangers and Chicago Blackhawks, you would probably know that the Detroit Red Wings were added as an expansion team alongside the Rangers and Blackhawks. On April 18, 1926, at the NHL meeting to discuss expansion, the league would be swamped with applications for franchises, with 3 from Chicago, 1 from Cleveland, 1 from Hamilton, 1 from New York, 1 from New Jersey, and a whopping 5 from Detroit. With the folding of the Western Hockey League, WHL, the NHL wanted to expand to new markets. The problem was, outside of the New York team that would become the Rangers, there was opposition to the idea of more expansion. And at the time, the NHL Constitution required all teams to agree to add expansion teams. For some reason, the New York Americans were more worried about making sure there were 2 Chicago teams instead of being the lone New York team. So, with the Americans being unwilling to let a franchise go to Detroit, was hope lost in the Motor City? It may have seemed so, but on May 2nd, 1926, the Constitution was amended so that only 2/3 of the league needed to agree on expansion teams. That led to the expectation that Detroit would indeed get their hands on an NHL team. On May 3rd, Detroit promoters Morris Kaplan and Morris Friedberg announced their purchase of the 1925 Stanley Cup champion Victoria Cougars, as they believed they would be granted the Detroit team. Unfortunately for them, the NHL decided on May 15th to give the new franchise to a group of investors led by Townsend, Sayburn, and McCreef on the condition that the arena was ready by the start of the season. However, the arena was not expected to be ready until December 1st, but we'll get there later.
So, the Victoria Cougars, owned by Lester and Frank Patrick, were sold to the Townsend Group for $100,000, with $25,000 going to Kaplan and Friedberg for their troubles. Anyway, the Detroit team would be permanently approved on September 25th, 1926. They were called the Detroit Cougars and would have a separate history from the Cougars of Victoria. They, along with the New York Rangers and Chicago Blackhawks, would increase the total team count of the NHL to 10. And yeah, that was how the Detroit Cougars were founded. Not as interesting as other teams, but still kind of cool. So, about the arena. The Detroit Cougars did not have one to begin their NHL tenure, and would not actually have one for the whole first season. Still much for a December 1st grand opening. Where did they play then? The Cougars would play their first season in Border Cities Arena in Windsor, Ontario. Art Duncan, a former player of the WHL's Calgary Tigers, would be one of the prominent members of the Cougars organization at the time, as he coached the team and was a player for them.
The Cougars would play their first game on November 18th, 1926 against the Boston Bruins. They would unfortunately lose 2-0. That would pretty much tell the story of the season, as they finished last in the NHL with a 12-28-4 record for 28 points. Those 12 wins and 4 ties are both records for fewest wins and ties in the season.
The next season would be an improvement. For one, the 1927-28 season was the first where the Cougars actually played in Detroit, in the new Detroit Olympia. The team played their first game there on November 22nd, 1927, and the arena would remain their home until 1979. That same year, Duncan was traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs and replaced as coach and general manager by recently retired Ottawa Senators player Jack Adams. Adams would be the face of the Detroit franchise for the next 36 years as a GM or coach.
The Cougars would finish the 1927-28 season with a 19-19-6 record, giving them the 4th spot in the American Division. That was an improvement of a season, but the Cougars would really improve the next year when they made the 1929 playoffs. Carson Cooper led the team in scoring, yet in a 2-game series with the Maple Leafs, the Cougars would be outscored 7-2. So, not a great series, but at least Detroit's team made the postseason.
I tried to avoid calling this team the Cougars. In 1930, they were renamed to the Detroit Falcons as a result of a newspaper promotion. Also because fans apparently were unable to pronounce the name Cougars, according to the News Palladium of Benton Harbor, Michigan. That was very strange, but I guess if it's true, it's a valid reason. That is not the reason I avoid calling them the Cougars, as the team would not stay the Falcons for long either. You see, financial struggles in 1931 due to the Great Depression led the team into receivership. That led to new ownership, and with that, another name change, one that would stay more permanent. The Detroit Falcons would be purchased by Chicago grain merchant James E. Norris. Not an unfamiliar name if you have watched the prior video. His first decision as the owner of the Falcons was simple: change the name. Why change the name? I don't know, maybe he thought it was associated with bad play? It was a good decision to change it though, as he would design a new logo, a wheel with a wing protruding from it. That logo has stayed almost the same since its inception in 1932. The color scheme of red and white would transfer over from the Cougars and the Falcons. What was the name of this team, though? Well, they would be called the Detroit Red Wings. The name and logo were meant to do two things. For one, the wheel was meant to represent Detroit's auto industry. Second, the name and logo were meant to pay homage to a hockey team that Norris had played against earlier in his life, the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association, or the MAAA. Nicknamed the Winged Wheelers, a team that had won the Stanley Cup in 1893. Maybe this was meant to bring luck to the franchise? I personally believe that the Red Wings moniker was a perfect selection, and the same goes for the logo.
This new look would begin a turnaround in Hockeytown. Red Wings player Carl Voss would be the first player to win the Rookie of the Year award in 1932-33. But it gets better than that, as the team also made a run to the semifinals in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But it gets even better than that. The Detroit Red Wings would make it all the way to the Stanley Cup finals in 1934. While they would lose to the Blackhawks, it finally seemed like the fortunes of Motown's team were shifting.
The Red Wings would clearly begin to improve as a team, and it all culminated in the 1935-36 season. The Red Wings would make it to the Stanley Cup Finals yet again, this time to play the Maple Leafs. To get there, the Wings played in the longest game in NHL history. They played the Montreal Maroons the first game of a semifinal matchup. The Wings won 1-0 when Mud Brunto scored in the sixth overtime, with the game lasting 176 minutes and 30 seconds of actual game time. So, without all the pauses and intermissions between periods. Anyway, back to the finals. The Red Wings would beat the Maple Leafs to win their first Stanley Cup. But it gets even better, as the next season, in 1936-37, the Wings beat the Rangers in the finals to win their second consecutive cup, making them the NHL's first American franchise to repeat as champions.
The only other important part of this early era of Wings hockey was when they and the Montreal Canadiens became the first teams to play in Europe when they visited Paris and London. The Red Wings and Canadiens would play 9 games, with the Wings going 3-5-1. That would end the early years of the Red Wings. So it's time to move forward, into an era of prolonged success in Hockeytown. For the last time, let's talk about the original 6 era, but for the Red Wings this time. The Red Wings would have their most dominant years with this era of about 25 seasons. Starting in the 1940s, the Red Wings would be led by players like Mud Brunto and Sid Howe. Together, they helped the Wings make 3 straight finals appearances from 1941 to 1943. In 1941, the Red Wings were swept by the Boston Bruins. That sucks, but it could be no worse than in 1942, when the Red Wings held a 3-0 series lead in the finals, yet let the Toronto Maple Leafs come all the way back to win in 7 games. Finally, in 1943, with Howe and Brunto having 20 goals apiece, the Wings took revenge on the Bruins, sweeping them to win their 3rd Stanley Cup.
The Wings would continue to dominate in the 1940s, making the playoffs every year and the finals 3 more times. Around the late 1940s is when some of the greatest players in Detroit Red Wings history would join the team, including the greatest in Gordie Howe. No, he's not related to Sid Howe. Gordie Howe, known as Mr. Hockey, joined the team in 1946. He was a right winger from Floral, Saskatchewan, and he would become one of the greatest players of all time. However, still being young, he only had 7 goals and 15 assists in his first season. That same 1946-47 season was also Jack Adams' last as a coach, stepping down to focus on being the Wings' GM. Tommy Ivan, the minor league affiliate coach, would replace him. Gordie Howe wasn't the only star of these Red Wings teams, as his 2 linemates were as well. Howe played on a line with Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay. Together, the 3 formed one of the greatest lines in NHL history. You can tell the line was great because it was given a name, dubbed the production line. Defenseman Red Kelly also joined the Red Wings at this time for some more star power. Lindsay would lead the Wings to the finals in 1948 with 33 goals, but the Toronto Maple Leafs would sweep them. Then, in another Stanley Cup Finals appearance during the 1948-49 season, the Red Wings would also get swept by Toronto. The Maple Leafs must have clicked after going down 3-0 to the Wings in the 1942 finals, because they were dominant over the Red Wings, sweeping them in both these two finals and beating them in 7 games in the 1945 Stanley Cup Finals. However, after 2 Stanley Cup losses, the Red Wings rebounded in 1950, winning their 4th Stanley Cup when Pete Bibando scored the double overtime cup-winning goal at home against the New York Rangers. After the game, Ted Lindsay would skate around the Detroit Olympia hoisting Lord Stanley above his head. That would start a tradition that has lasted to this day. It's kind of wild to think that my favorite team was the one on which hoisting the Stanley Cup began, but it's neat. The Red Wings would be upset by the Canadiens in the 1951 semifinals. However, as we have learned, the Red Wings of this era, led by their immense star power of Hal, Lindsay, and Abel, as well as second-year goaltender Terry Sawchuk, would tend to respond to loss as well. That is what they did when they won their 5th Stanley Cup in 1952. The Wings did this in dominant fashion, sweeping both of their matchups to go 8-0 while scoring 24 goals in those games to the combined 5 goals of the Canadiens and Maple Leafs. That series was also when the octopus tradition started in Detroit, where people would throw an octopus onto the ice. This was due to how 8 wins was needed to win the Stanley Cup at the time. Obviously, 16 wins are needed today, but the tradition still stands, and people could just throw 2 octopi if they wanted to.
The Red Wings would experience some changes in the next season. For one, Sid Abel would leave Detroit for Chicago, leading to Alex Del Vecchio having to take his place on the production line. The good thing was Del Vecchio was also a Hall of Fame talent, but Abel wasn't the only loss in the organization, as James E. Norris would pass away in December of 1952. His daughter, Margaret Norris, would take over the team as team president and be the first woman to head an NHL franchise. A cool fun fact, in my opinion.
How did the Red Wings respond to these changes? Well, in the 1953 playoffs, they were upset by the Bruins, but that didn't really matter, as the Wings would win back-to-back cups in the next 2 seasons. First in 1954 over the Montreal Canadiens when Doug Harvey redirected the shot from Tony Lucic into his own net, and then in 1955, also over the Canadiens in 7 games. Additionally, that 1954-55 season was the final of 7 consecutive regular season titles, an NHL record.
Margaret Norris's ownership of the Wings didn't last long, as in the 1955 offseason, she lost the team to her brother, Bruce Norris, as he had inherited his father's grain business. Coincidentally, this was around the time where the Red Wings would begin to fall off. They lost to the Canadiens in 1956 finals, a team which would go on to win 5 straight cups. So you can't really blame the Wings for losing to them. But the Red Wings would continue to regress, and along with that, make questionable moves by GM Jack Adams.
For one, Ted Lindsay was traded to the Blackhawks after scoring 30 goals and led the league with 55 assists. That was because he started the NHL's Players Association, NHLPA, with Doug Harvey. Glenn Hall was traded alongside him, and after that, the Wings would lose in round 1 to the Boston Bruins. That wasn't Jack Adams' worst trade, though, as after trading Sawchuk to the Bruins for Hall, he decided he wanted to reacquire him. But he traded the Bruins' Johnny Busick, a young, budding star who had played 21 seasons in Boston, scoring over 500 goals and having a Hall of Fame career. Sure, Sawchuk would stay in the league 12 more years, but his best days were behind him. The Red Wings were swept by the Canadiens in round 1 in the 1958 playoffs before missing the postseason altogether in 1959 for the first time in 21 years. The Wings, a veteran and resilient group, would figure things out and make 4 Stanley Cup finals between 1961 and 1966. The problem here was they didn't win the cup in any of these appearances, despite still having Hal, Del Vecchio, Norm Allman, and Parker McDonald, all of which could still score goals. They had Sawchuk and then Roger Crozier in net, and Lindsay even returned for a year in 1964-65. Yet, the Red Wings couldn't get the job done. Adams was fired in 1963, after 15 years as a coach and 31 years as a GM on a handshake deal. In all, he served 36 years as GM, the longest for any GM in NHL history.
And that ended the Red Wings' most dominant era. They had some absolute legends lace up the skates for them, in guys like Ted Lindsay, Terry Sawchuk, and Mr. Hockey himself, Gordie Howe. But that era has come to a close, and the Red Wings would find themselves in an era of darkness and despair. In the 1966-67 season, the Red Wings finished 5th in the standings, 24 points out of a playoff spot. Fans may not have known it at the time, but this would begin a period of darkness for the Wings that lasted almost 20 years. The Red Wings would only make the playoffs twice from 1967 to 1983, and only win 1 playoff series. From 1968 to 1982, not counting interims, the Wings had 14 head coaches, with none lasting more than 3 years. That is insane. This led to the Red Wings gaining the name the Dead Wings, or Dead Things. Dead Wings is a better nickname, and is by far the more common one. So, why were the Red Wings so bad? Well, reason one was the end of the old developmental system that allowed players to sign to teams as soon as they turned 16 years old. The other reason was Ned Harkness. He was hired as coach in 1970 and promoted to GM midway through the season. He was successful as a college coach, but he really did not work with the Wings. His two-way style of play did not fit with the veterans on the team, and the team did not like the rules he instilled, including no smoking, short hair, and rules regarding drinking and phone calls. So yeah, the team was bad and he was not helping, which led to his resignation in 1973.
The Red Wings were not that relevant at all during this time. One of the most important things that happened were when they acquired Frank Malovich from the Maple Leafs in the 1967-68 season. He would have 49 goals in 1968-69 and 2 All-Star seasons in Detroit, but nothing really amounted of that, and he was traded to Montreal in 1970. Additionally, Gordie Howe retired after the 1970-71 season, making things worse for Wings fans. Well, Gordie didn't retire, but he did retire from the Wings. He returned to play in the World Hockey Association, WHA, with his sons Marty and Mark Howe in 1972. Throughout the 1970s, Mickey Redmond had 2 50-goal seasons with the team, although he is now known for being the Wings color announcer, and the team made the mistake of trading Marcel Dion to the Los Angeles Kings before he reached his prime in 1975. Not much happened at this time. The Red Wings just sucked. One final thing to note is that the Red Wings would look for a new arena in the late 1970s. Murders were becoming more frequent near the Olympia, and Bruce Norris wanted to move to suburban Pontiac. But the city of Detroit gave a good enough offer to keep the team in Detroit, with a new arena being built on the banks of the Detroit River called the Joe Louis Arena, where the Wings would move during the 1979-80 season. Finally, the real last thing in that Bruce Norris would sell the Red Wings to the founder of Little Caesars Pizza, Mike Ilitch, in 1982, ending 50 years of Norris family ownership.
So yeah, that's it for this era. The Wings would still need some time to fully get their act together after this, but at the very least, there would be one player who would give the franchise a new hope.
The savior of the franchise, Steve Yzerman. From Cranbrook, British Columbia, he was drafted in 1983 by the Red Wings, and he immediately made an impact, leading the team in scoring in his rookie season. He, along with John Ogrodnik with 42 goals, Ivan Bodirev and Ron Duguay with 30 goals each, and defenseman Brad Park, led the Red Wings to the postseason for the first time in 6 years. That same year, Park won the Bill Masterton Trophy.
Brad Park's tenure in Detroit extended past his playing career, as after coach Harry Neal was fired 35 games into the 1985-86 season, Park was to take over, which he did for the final 45 games of the year. Unfortunately, that was the end of his tenure, as he could not improve the Wings and they finished with a horrendous 17-57-6 record for only 40 points. The Red Wings were a better team when Yzerman arrived, but it definitely took some time before they were truly elite, and they often had some awful seasons where they missed the playoffs still.
With having a star as talented as Yzerman comes needing an enforcer to protect him. So, enter Bob Probert, one of the most feared tough guys of all time and a fan favorite in Detroit. He played with the team in the 1980s and 1990s, and with him, Yzerman, Peter Klima, Adam Oates, Gerard Gallant, defenseman Darren Veach, and head coach Jacques Demers, the Red Wings would win a playoff series for only the second time in the modern era of the NHL. That is kind of pathetic, but it will all cancel out in the long run, trust me. Anyway, the Red Wings would win more than one round though, as they would advance to the conference finals. There, they faced the Edmonton Oilers, the West powerhouse at the time. The Red Wings unfortunately lost in 5, but the Oilers went on to win the Stanley Cup, which makes the Wings' efforts even more valiant.
The Red Wings built on such a great 1986-87 season by winning the Norris Division in the 1987-88 season. This was their first division title in 23 years, and their first in a multi-division NHL. The Wings would make it back to the conference finals that year, but unfortunately, they yet again fell to the eventual champion Oilers in 5 games. 2 great seasons. So how did the Wings follow this up? Well, Yzerman certainly kept improving and showing his stardom, scoring a career-high 65 goals in the 1988-89 season and 62 goals in the 1989-90 season. The problem was, the Wings lost to the Chicago Blackhawks in round 1 of the 1989 playoffs and didn't even make the postseason in 1990. There was beginning to become some serious rumors of Yzerman potentially being traded out of Detroit.
Changes were made in Hockeytown, with Demers being fired and replaced with Brian Murray, who was able to get the Wings back into the postseason. Additionally, new faces would join Yzerman to improve the Wings roster, like Sergei Fedorov, Ray Shepard, Paul Coffey, Slava Kozlov, Vladimir Konstantinov, Darren McCarty, and Nicholas Lidstrom. Not everyone knew it yet, but these players would be crucial pieces to the Red Wings for years to come, and some would be Hall of Fame talents. Things would really change in Detroit when Scotty Bowman arrived to coach the team in 1993. The Yzerman trade rumors ended, and during the lockout-shortened 1994-95 season, just Bowman's second season as head coach, the Red Wings would make it to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time in 29 years. This was a big moment, but the celebration was cut short, as the Wings were no match for the New Jersey Devils, who would sweep them for their first Stanley Cup victory. While the ending was disappointing, the Red Wings seemed to be picking up steam. The Red Wings would add more stars, like goalie Mike Vernon. They also added Slava Fedosov and Igor Larionov. Together with Fedorov, Kozlov, and Konstantinov, they formed the Russian Five. They were a group of 5 players, 3 forwards and 2 defensemen, who played on a line together. They dominated teams and were a huge reason in the Red Wings' rise to dominance. During the 1995-96 season, the Red Wings exemplified this dominance, winning in the NHL record 62 games. In the playoffs, they made it to the Western Conference Finals after an iconic Steve Yzerman double overtime series-winning goal in Game 7 over the St. Louis Blues. However, the Wings would lose to the Colorado Avalanche in the conference finals, as they went on to lift Lord Stanley. The Colorado Avalanche. They would begin to build an intense rivalry with our stars, the Wings, and it all stems from that 1996 Western Conference Final. Claude Lemieux threw a dangerous hit from behind on Chris Draper during that series, sparking a growing hatred between the teams. That culminated on March 26, 1997, during a regular season game in Detroit between the two Titans. During that game, Darren McCarty went after and got his revenge on Claude Lemieux, beating the brakes off him. Additionally, Avalanche goalie Patrick Waugh and Wings goalie Mike Vernon had their own separate fight, among the other fights that occurred during the night. The Wings would win that game, 6-5 in overtime, with, obviously, Darren McCarty scoring the overtime winning goal. The game was dubbed Fight Night at the Joe. Today, it stands as one of the most iconic games of all time. For the 1996-97 season as a whole, the Wings, joined by Brendan Shanahan and Larry Murphy, would go on a deep run, beating the Blues in 6 games in Round 1 and sweeping the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim in Round 2. Then, in the Western Conference Finals, they faced the Avalanche, because, of course they did. But they got their revenge this time, winning in 6 games to advance to the Stanley Cup Finals, where they swept the Philadelphia Flyers to win their 8th Stanley Cup and first in 42 years, which was the longest drought in the league at the time. Mike Vernon won the Conn Smythe for MVP of the postseason, as the Red Wings and captain Steve Yzerman finally got over the hump.
The Red Wings couldn't celebrate long, though, as tragedy rocked the organization 6 days after the Cup win. Red Wings defenseman Vladimir Konstantinov was involved in a limousine accident in which he sustained a brain injury that marked the end of his NHL career. On top of that, Wings trainer Sergei Monatsakanov suffered similar injuries. The only positive outcome was that Slava Fedosov, who was injured in the accident, managed to make it out without any major career-ending injury.
It was a horrible accident, and the Red Wings decided they were going to dedicate the 1997-98 season to Konstantinov. And that is just what they did, as they made it all the way back to the Stanley Cup Finals, where they swept the Washington Capitals to repeat as Stanley Cup champions. Captain and Conn Smythe winner Steve Yzerman gave the Stanley Cup immediately to Konstantinov after he hoisted it, as Konstantinov had come onto the ice in his wheelchair to be with the team and the Cup. Brendan Shanahan called it a moment that transcended sports, and he was not wrong.
The Red Wings aimed to three-peat for the first time in franchise history the next year, and made sure the rest of the NHL knew it by acquiring one of the best defensemen in the NHL in Chris Chelios from the Chicago Blackhawks in March of 1999. The Wings would also obtain defenseman Ulf Samuelsson, winger Wendell Clark, and goalie Bill Ranford. They were really putting all of their chips in, but alas, the three-peat could not be, as the Wings lost in the Western Conference semifinals in 6 games. Guess who did them in? The Avalanche. They really were the only team who stood a chance against the Red Wings of this era, as they also beat the Wings in 2000 in Round 2.
In the 2001 playoffs, the Wings, who were the second best team in the NHL during the 2000-2001 regular season, would be upset by the Los Angeles Kings. That sparked something in the Red Wings, as they went on a spending spree in the 2001 offseason. First, the Red Wings brought legendary goalie and defending Vezina Trophy winner Dominik Hasek to Motown in a trade with the Buffalo Sabres. Then, in free agency, the Red Wings would bring in some more legends and left winger Luc Robitaille and right winger Brett Hull. However, the Wings weren't done yet because they still had a prospect they wanted to add to the team. Enter Pavel Datsyuk from the Russian Super League, a 7th-round pick that would exceed expectations more than anyone would ever believe. These all made the Wings the favorites to win the 2002 Stanley Cup. But did they? Well, the Red Wings certainly started well, posting the best record in the 2001-2002 regular season. Then in the playoffs, the Wings would beat the Vancouver Canucks and the Blues in rounds 1 and 2 before facing the Avalanche yet again in the Western Conference Finals. They would win to make the Stanley Cup Finals. There, they would face the Carolina Hurricanes, who were on a Cinderella story. Well, the Red Wings would crush this little story, winning their 10th Stanley Cup in 5 games. Nicklas Lindstrom, one of the best defensemen in the league at this point, would win the Conn Smythe. This Red Wings team is, by many, considered the best of all time, and I would agree. Unfortunately, though, they would take 2 hits, as both goalie Hasek and coach Bowman retired after the season concluded.
So with that, the Red Wings would begin to see many changes. Dave Lewis would be the new coach for 2002-03, and more changes were on the way. But Henrik Zetterberg did join the team, another late-round steal from the draft. With him, the Red Wings had another great season, finishing second in the West and third in the league. However, in the playoffs, they were swept in round 1 by the 7th-seeded Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. Ahead of the 2003-04 season, Hasek came back for some reason. Yeah, I don't know. He only lasted 14 games. Then he retired again because his groin got injured. That's besides the point. The Red Wings had another strong season, finishing at the top of the Central Division in the NHL and making the 2004 playoffs, where they would beat the Nashville Predators in round 1 in 6 games. Then, in round 2, versus the Calgary Flames, the Wings would lose in 6, partly due to Yzerman getting injured in Game 5. The Red Wings were getting older, but they were still really good. Veterans like Steve Yzerman, Brendan Shanahan, and Chris Draper were re-signed to stay with the team in 2004. However, they would not be the core group for much longer, as players like Datsuk and Zetterberg would show that they could be dominant in the league very soon. Overall, the Red Wings were older, and Yzerman was near the end of his career. But they had one player who they could always rely on. His name? Nicklas Lidstrom.
Nicklas Lidstrom was always a good defenseman, but his true dominance began in the 2000s, when he won 7 Norris trophies from 2001 to 2010-2011. He would be the face of the Red Wings around this time, and a huge reason why they were so successful. The 2005-06 season began with the hiring of Mike Babcock as coach on July 15th, and ended with a President's Trophy win and a 58-16-4 record for 124 points. One scary thing happened this season, though, as in a November 21st game against the Predators, Red Wings defenseman Jerry Fisher suffered a heart arrhythmia on the bench, leading the game to be rescheduled to January 23rd, 2006. This was the first time an NHL game was postponed due to injury, with the Predators being allowed to retain their 1-0 lead despite the game being restarted. They would win the game 3-2 over the Wings. The Wings opened the 2006 playoffs with an electric 3-2 win over the Oilers, their first-round opponent. Yet, the team lost in 6 games, and the Wings would have to go through a tough offseason. First, Shanahan left the team, which is made up by Hasek returning again for some reason. But then, it finally happened. Yzerman, after 23 seasons, would retire from the NHL. Yzerman left the league with the second most games played with one team, only being beat by fellow Red Wings legend Alex Delvecchio. He was also the longest-serving captain in NHL history. His number 19 would be retired on January 2nd of 2007.
The Red Wings were in need of a new captain for the 2006-07 season. And who else would it be but Lidstrom? He led the Wings to another top seed in the West. In the 2007 playoffs, the Wings would beat both the Flames and San Jose Sharks in 6 games. Then, in the conference finals, the Wings faced the Anaheim Ducks, where they lost in 6 games to the eventual Cup champions.
The past few seasons have been rough, well, for the standards of the Red Wings. The 2007-08 season was different, however. The season started with Zetterberg recording a point in each of the team's first 16 games, a franchise record. The Red Wings easily cruised to the playoffs, as per usual. There, they faced the Predators in round 1. Hasek would struggle in the series, specifically games 3 and 4, which were both losses. That led Coach Babcock to put Chris Osgood in net. Osgood had been with the Wings before, and was reacquired in 2005 as a backup. But now he needed to be more than a backup, which is exactly what he did, as he would play well enough to stay in the net for the rest of the postseason. And the Red Wings would win their 11th Stanley Cup, with the final victory coming on June 4th, 2008, a 3-2 win over the Pittsburgh Penguins, where Zetterberg recorded the game winner and won the Conn Smythe. With Lidstrom from Sweden as the captain, the Wings would become the first team to win the Cup while being captained by a non-North American player. The Wings entered the 2008-09 season on top of the world, and that would stay pretty much the same for the whole season, as the Wings would get the honor to play in the Winter Classic on New Year's Day against the Blackhawks at Wrigley Field in Chicago, where they would win 6-4. The Red Wings finished the season second in the conference, only behind the Sharks, and would be the first team to ever top 100 points for 9 straight seasons.
In the playoffs, the Red Wings swept the Columbus Blue Jackets in round 1 before facing the 8th-seeded Ducks in a tightly contested 7-game series in round 2. The Wings squeaked out to face the Blackhawks in the Western Conference Finals. The Wings would win in 5 games and make it back to the Stanley Cup Finals, where they would rematch against the Penguins. The Wings could not repeat their success, though, as the Penguins defeated them in 7 games. The Red Wings began the 2009-10 season in Stockholm, Sweden, where they lost to the St. Louis Blues in a pair of games, 4-3 and 5-3, respectively. Injuries killed the Wings this year, with players like Zetterberg, Thomas Holmstrom, Johan Franzen, Valtteri Filppula, and Nicholas Kronwall, the legend he is, all being injured at points in the season. However, a 13-2 run for 28 points after the Olympic break led the Wings to the playoffs anyway, where they beat the Phoenix Coyotes in round 1 of the playoffs. Then in round 2, the Wings would unfortunately fall in 5 games to the Sharks. The Red Wings would make the playoffs for the 20th straight year in 2010-11, with a 47-25-10 record and 104 points. In the playoffs, the Wings swept the Coyotes in round 1, just to go down 3-0 to the Sharks. So the season is over. Or not, because the Wings came back to tie the series. But they would lose Game 7, 3-2, and would be eliminated from the playoffs. On February 14th, 2012, the Wings would set the record for most consecutive home wins in a season, with their 21st win 3-1 against the Dallas Stars. The Wings would then break the overall consecutive win record with their 23rd win over the Sharks on February 19th. The Wings made the playoffs again in the 2011-12 season, for the 21st time in a row, which is cool, but they lost in 5 games in round 1 to the Predators.
On Thursday, May 31st, 2012, Lidstrom retired after his 20th consecutive NHL season and his 6th as captain. That truly marked a shift in the Red Wings. You may have noticed that they were on a decline since winning the Stanley Cup in 2008. Well, with the departure of their best player, and also the departure of Thomas Holmstrom, how would the Wings fare?
Zetterberg would be the next captain of the Red Wings, and he, Datsuk, and Kronwall would be the main stars the Red Wings looked to. In the 2012-13 season, things certainly weren't easy, as the Wings clinched their postseason spot on April 27, 2013, in a 3-0 win over the Stars in which, had they lost in regulation, they would have been eliminated from the playoffs. So, the Red Wings kept their precious playoff streak, now at 22 years. The Red Wings would face the Ducks in round 1, in a 7-game series where 4 games went to overtime. But the Wings prevailed. After a 3-2 Game 7 win in Anaheim, in round 2, they faced the juggernaut Blackhawks. This series also went to 7 games, but the Wings' luck would not last, as the eventual champion Blackhawks beat the Red Wings in overtime 2-1 in Game 7 on May 29.
So, the Red Wings had a decent season in 2012-13, but now, things would really begin to decline. First, to lay the scene, the Red Wings moved into the Atlantic Division of the Eastern Conference for the 2013-14 season onwards. Also that season, the Red Wings would host the 2014 Winter Classic on New Year's Day at Michigan Stadium versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. They lost 3-2 in the shootout, but hey, the game set an NHL attendance record with 105,491 fans, so that's cool. And what do you know? The Red Wings made the playoffs again, 23 straight seasons. That didn't matter, though, as the Boston Bruins had their way with the Wings and beat them in 5 games in round 1. On April 9th, 2015, 24 straight seasons. This was near historic, and it adds to nothing because the Red Wings lost to the Tampa Bay Lightning in round 1 in 7 games. Babcock would leave after the 2014-15 season ended, and a new head coach would stumble into Hockeytown, named Jeff Blashill, who had coached the Wings' American Hockey League AHL affiliate, the Grand Rapids Griffins. Also, this is when Dylan Larkin would join the Red Wings. Just a rookie now, he would make his way into the hearts of many Red Wings fans soon enough. But before that, the Red Wings made the playoffs for the 25th consecutive season in 2015-16. The Lightning beat them in round 1 in 5 games. Then, a season of true despair would befall on the Red Wings in the form of 2016-17, as on February 10th, 2017, longtime owner Mike Ilitch passed away at 87 years old. This was the same year that the Red Wings would leave the iconic Joe Louis Arena, with the final game there being a 4-1 win over the New Jersey Devils on April 9th, 2017. Oh yeah, one last thing. For the first time in 25 years, the Red Wings missed the playoffs.
And that was it. The decline had finished, or at least to a certain extent. Now came a process of rebuilding for the Red Wings, one that has taken longer than expected.
The Red Wings would play their first game at Little Caesars Arena on October 5th, 2017, a 4-2 victory over the Minnesota Wild. However, the Red Wings still missed the playoffs, going 30-39-13 and missing the playoffs for 2 straight seasons for the first time since the early 1980s. That is a trend that would continue for a while. They got worse and worse and worse, and then were horrible in the COVID-19 shortened 2019-20 season, finishing with a 17-45-5 record, having the worst record in the league for the first time since 1985-86. They did not win the draft lottery. This was also the first year when the legendary Yzerman returned as GM, seeing as he was hired on April 19, 2019. Since that horrendous season, things have improved in Detroit, but still, there have been no playoff appearances. On January 13, 2021, Dylan Larkin was named the first captain since Zetterberg retired in 2018. Then in 2021-22, the Wings were joined by 2 great rookies in winger Lucas Raymond and defenseman Mort Seider. Seider would win the Calder Memorial Trophy, but both proved to be cornerstone pieces for the future. So, the team was bad, but there was hope. On April 30th, 2022, Blashill was replaced with Derek Lalonde as head coach, and the Wings improved even more, still being bad, but not as bad.
Then, in 2023-24, the Red Wings went 41-32-9 and were actually kind of good. They almost made the playoffs, but a silly tiebreaker kept them out on April 16, 2024, during the last regular season game. My pain was so close to ending. Either way, this was a sign of things to come, right? Maybe, but not in 2024-25, as the Wings started horribly, which led to Lalonde's firing along with assistant coach Bob Buchner on December 26, 2024. They were replaced with head coach Todd McClellan and assistant coach Trent Yanni. They played much better under the new staff, but it didn't matter. The Red Wings were eliminated from the playoffs on April 12, 2025, and they finished with a 39-35-8 record. 9 straight seasons of no playoffs, if you've been counting. 9 straight. But they have these really cool Centennial jerseys this year, so that's cool.
Admittedly, as a Wings fan, I am biased, but I believe that the Detroit Red Wings have a very bright future. They have star forwards in Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond and a star defenseman in Moritz Seider already. And that is not even mentioning other NHL players who are great or could improve, like Alex DeBrincat, Emmett Finney, Simon Edvinsson, Marco Kasper, Axel Sandin Pelika, Albert Johansson, and Nate Danielson. On top of them, the Red Wings have a great prospect pools, with guys like Michael Brandstad-Nygaard and Carter Bear, and 2 elite goalie prospects in Sebastian Kosa and Trey Augustine. I am biased, but this team could be a threat for a long time. Hopefully that is soon, as in this year soon. I am tired of waiting. The Red Wings have an illustrious history, the greatest of an American NHL franchise and possibly the greatest outside of the Montreal Canadiens. With that said, the past 9 years have marred the team's reputation, and as a fan, it has been hard to watch them at times. So many great years and great teams, yet that was a long time ago, and for a new era of fans, including myself, the Red Wings have been pretty irrelevant.
But I keep watching. I watch the Red Wings, even when they lose badly. I also watch them when they win. No matter what happens, I keep watching. So if you're going to leave this video with anything, leave it with this. Never stop being a fan of the team you love. There will be good times and bad, but if you truly are a fan, you will stick by them. You will remember and celebrate the championship wins and the Hall of Fame players. When the team is suboptimal, you can still cherish and take joy in the little things, like certain fun players or memorable games. That is what I do. It's tough sometimes to be a Red Wings fan, but I'll never stop rooting for my team. And that's it. That's the series. I can't even believe it's over, but it is. If you watched to the end, thank you for being a part of the journey. It has been a fun ride for me, and I hope it's been fun for you. Maybe one day I will return and cover some other NHL teams, just for fun. But until next time, I'm signing off here. Maybe I'll catch you in the stands or somewhere. For now, this has been the Original Six Celebration.